Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar on what is, I think, one of the most important subjects when it comes to all things financial, that is money and mental health. So we often treat these two areas separately, money as something practical and mental health as something emotional, but in real life the two are deeply connected. So money worries can place huge pressure on our mental health, and when our mental health dips, it becomes much harder to stay on top of our finances. So that two-way connection affects almost all of us at some point in our lives, especially during times of rising living costs, job uncertainty, or major life changes. So we've seen this happening in recent years, with many people experiencing heightened stress and anxiety about money due to cost of living challenges. By normalising the conversation around money and mental health, hopefully we can work to remove the stigma that's attached to these issues and make it easier for people to benefit from early intervention. So why does this topic matter? Well, there's a few stats that I pulled out here. Firstly, people in problem debt are more than twice as likely to experience a mental health problem, so 39%, compared to those without debt, which is just 18%. 46% of people in problem debt also have a mental health problem, and people with depression and problem debt are 4.2 times more likely to still have depression 18 months later. Okay, so over the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to look at how money worries impact mental well-being, look at how mental health challenges can make managing money harder, explore the vicious cycle that can form between the two, and then most importantly perhaps to talk through some practical steps and sources of support that can help to break that cycle. So let's start with the first half of the equation, how financial difficulty affects mental health. Money problems are one of the most common sources of stress. People often experience anxiety about bills, housing issues, or indeed the debt that they're carrying. This anxiety creates uncertainty, fear, and pressure, and sometimes even shame or guilt. People often blame themselves for not being able to manage their debt or for struggling to keep up with costs, even when the causes of those things are beyond their control. This emotional strain can exacerbate anxiety, create low mood, feelings of failure, and a sense of being overwhelmed, leading to a loss of sleep and ultimately burnout. But it doesn't just affect how we feel, it affects how we behave. So have you ever avoided, for example, opening a bill because you weren't ready to face it, or you've put off checking your bank balance? That type of avoidance is extremely common when you're under pressure. Financial stress can also affect concentration, decision-making, and our ability to plan, all of which makes day-to-day tasks feel heavier than they should. So let's look at an example. This is Claire's story. So it's a fictional case, but it is informed by evidence. So Claire is a single parent working full-time. Over the winter, her energy bills rose sharply and she started to use credit cards to bridge the gap in her budget, thinking it would just be a temporary thing. So at first she managed, but her minimum payments then kept rising. She started avoiding her bank app because it made her anxious. Eventually she stopped opening letters altogether. She struggled to sleep, her work performance dipped, and she felt ashamed to ask for help. So this scenario, as I said, although it's fictional, it does mirror national data showing that financial distress significantly increases anxiety and depression. 31% of UK adults have reported feeling anxious about their financial situation, according to a 2024 poll. So now let's flip the conversation. Poor mental health doesn't only come from money problems, it can of course cause money problems as well. So when someone is struggling with anxiety, depression, burnout, or any kind of mental health issue, their ability to manage day-to-day tasks is often affected. Things like paying bills, replying to emails, making decisions, or even opening letters can feel overwhelming. Energy levels drop, motivation drops, and memory and concentration can be affected. And tasks that would normally take 5 minutes suddenly feel like climbing a mountain. Mental health difficulties can also affect work. That's whether it's through taking sick leave, reduced productivity at work, or finding it harder to manage a busy workload. Any of these can lead to reduced income and increased financial pressure. For some people, impulsive or emotional spending can also become a coping mechanism, something to feel better in the moment. But afterwards, it often leads to regret and further stress. So I thought it'd be interesting just to look at some of the signs to look out for, either for yourself or for someone you know, including things like sudden or unexplained spending habits, avoiding financial conversations, relying on credit more often, unopened bills, missed payments. These are all signs not of weakness, but of someone who is overwhelmed and who needs support. So we'll look at another story. This is Michael's story, again, a fictional case, but one that shows how poor mental health can reduce capability. So Michael has lived with depression for several years. When he had a severe dip, his daily functioning collapsed. He forgot to pay his council tax and a couple of direct debits, and late fees stacked up, which added to the pressure. He stopped opening letters because he felt overwhelmed. By the time he reached out, he had accumulated several missed payments and was feeling a deep sense of shame. And this matches research that shows people experiencing mental health problems are 3.5 times more likely to be in problem debt. So when you put both of those sides together, you can see how easily a cycle can form. Money worries affect mental health, which makes it harder to manage your finances, which leads to more money worries. The cycle goes on and can actually feel never-ending, and when you're stuck in it, often people can feel alone or ashamed. So a final fictional example just to show us how people can be hit hard by exactly that cycle. So Tom, he's 23, recently moved out of home, working his first full-time job. Rising rent and grocery costs mean he lives paycheck to paycheck. When his mental health dipped due to workplace stress, he started emotional spending online. Afterwards, he felt guilty, trapped, and avoided checking his bank balance. Of course, the avoidance made things worse and he fell behind on his repayments. So ONS data shows that younger adults, such as Tom, typically aged 16 to 29, experience the highest levels of moderate to severe depression symptoms, 26%, and are more likely to experience financial worries. The good news is the cycle can be broken. So we're going to turn next to look at some support tools and strategies to cope with money and mental health concerns. So if you don't know where to start, reaching out to someone is a good first step. There is a strong link between money struggles and feelings of shame or embarrassment, which often stops people from reaching out. But the earlier you talk to somebody, the easier it is to find solutions and prevent them from escalating. So a first step could be speaking to your current financial providers. For example, support with making repayments on any borrowing that you might have from them. Here at Commsave, we have a dedicated member solutions team, for example, where if somebody's circumstances have changed since they took out a loan, we can look to work with them to build them a correct solution. You might also look at speaking to a specialist mental health agency, a debt advice charity, perhaps support that's available through work like an employee assistance program, your local GP or NHS mental health support, or simply a trusted friend or family member. You don't have to have all the answers before you speak to somebody. Just starting that conversation can be a huge relief. And what feels like an unmanageable problem often feels much more manageable when it's shared. So I'm going to now put up a few slides that contain details of various sources of support. I'm going to leave each one up for a few seconds. For those of you here with us today, we've got this information on some fact sheets for you to take away. If you're watching online, please do pause the recording at the appropriate point and use the contact details to reach out for support. We'll also place all of these links in the video description below. So starting with some immediate sources of support if you feel that you need help right now. There are some on the screen there: Samaritans, Shout, the Tech Support Service, and the NHS Urgent Mental Health Helpline. Here are some general sources of support that you might find useful. Mind and the Mental Health Foundation are well worth looking up. And here are some organisations that can help you if you're experiencing money worries. So the StepChange Debt Charity, National Debtline and Citizens Advice, all of them can provide advice and support as to what the next steps might be for your situation. So let's turn next to some practical actions that you can look at taking, starting with small, manageable financial tasks. I think the first thing I'd say is when money feels overwhelming, the goal is not to fix everything at once. One of the biggest barriers people can face is that their finances just feel too big, too complicated, or even too scary to deal with. And when that happens, it's completely natural to avoid it. So instead, we want to shrink the task. That might mean something as simple as opening one letter, checking one account, or spending 5 minutes reviewing your balance. These small actions might not seem like much, but they create momentum. Taking just one step makes the next step feel easier. It's about making some progress rather than trying to achieve perfection. Another really helpful step, especially when your energy or perhaps your mental bandwidth is low, is to remove as many decisions as possible. So setting up automatic payments for bills, rent, or minimum payments can take a huge amount of pressure off. It means you don't have to remember every date, worry about missing something when you're not feeling at your best. It also helps reduce late fees or penalties, which can otherwise add to financial stress. So you could think of it maybe as creating like a safety net for yourself, something that keeps things ticking along, even during the more difficult periods. And technology can also be a really useful support here. Budgeting apps or simple bank alerts can help you stay aware of what's going on without needing to constantly check or keep everything in your head. So for example, you might set up alerts for when your balance drops below a certain amount or when a payment's due. Some apps will even categorize your spending automatically, which can give you a clearer picture without a lot of effort. And again, it's not about monitoring every single penny, but more so just giving yourself some visibility and reduce the surprise that comes from unexpected financial events, the kind of things that can cause your stress levels to spike. We have a separate webinar specifically on the topic of budgeting, so maybe that might be something useful for you to check out, just to pick up a few tips as to how that might work for you. So let's look at a few key takeaways from the session. So we've seen how money and mental health are deeply connected and both sides influence each other. Struggling with either is nothing to be ashamed of. The most important thing is recognizing the cycle and reaching out early. Small, manageable steps can really make a big difference. And perhaps critically, you don't have to face this alone. If you are struggling, please reach out. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have, or if you'd prefer to reach out privately afterwards, you're very welcome to do that too.
So if I've got a loan, would taking payments for the short term or long term, which one would be more manageable?
So I think this is really a question about your own personal preference for managing your money. So there's always a bit of a trade-off where borrowing's concerned. The sooner that you can pay a debt off, the better it is financially because you're going to be paying less interest, so the ultimate balance that you will repay is going to be smaller. The downside is your repayments in the short term might be larger. So you might think, well, I'm not necessarily comfortable carrying debt for a long period of time. That's a perfectly natural way to think about it. But the flip side of that is in the short term, my payments are going to be larger because I want to get the debt settled more quickly. The flip side of that would be I'm happier to borrow over the longer term because it means there's less pressure on my budget in the short term. So if actually day-to-day managing of your weekly or monthly budget is where you might struggle, perhaps it might make more sense to extend the debt over a longer term. So I think it's very much, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution to that. It might be just a question of thinking, well, what's the most important factor to me right now? Is it, I want to get this debt paid in the short term and I'll sort of deal with the implications of that in terms of repayments, or actually what matters to me most at the moment is my budget situation. and I don't quite have the capacity to be able to extend, to pay it in the short term rather. I need to extend it over a longer period. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so let me also ask one. What advice are you going to give to someone who is on debt? So at the end of the month or at the time whereby the salary is paid, a lot of deduction going out from his or her accounts. And anytime this person visits to check the account balance, the person is depressed because it's like working for the whole month, and at the end of the month, everything is going, you're not having enough, or you're not having what you've set to actually keep in your accounts in there. So you're always depressed at the end of the month. What kind of advice?
Yeah, I think this is quite a common situation. I think we get quite a lot of inquiries here at the credit union about people in that type of situation. And I think that's where speaking to a specialist debt advice charity can be a useful first step, particularly if the debt that you have is still to extend over a period of time. Like if it's something that's going to end in the next month or two, it's, you know, it feels perhaps more manageable. But if it's something that you've got another 3 years worth of repayments to pay, clearly that's going to be a more difficult situation. So I know, for example, at Commsave here, we've helped people who have multiple debts, and because of the number of repayments they're making, exactly the situation you described, it feels like the budget's really short at the end of the month and there's nothing for even, you know, managing bills, let alone kind of discretionary payments. We've helped people with consolidating debt so that rather than making 5 or 6 payments to different creditors, you can consolidate it into one, and you would expect that payment to be lower, so it's putting a little bit less pressure on your budget. There's other considerations to think about within that, such as the interest rate that would apply to the loan. But that's where potentially, depending on the extent of the situation and how comfortable you feel in managing your way out of it, it's where having a helping hand from organisations like StepChange, for example, can really help, because they can sort of take a look at your situation and say the best solution for you is to do this. So I guess it's one of the things, if you feel comfortable to kind of manage it, look at the options around a consolidation, for example, even to contact your creditors, and to be able to say, at the moment, I'm struggling because of this situation. Can we agree reduce repayments for a period? You know, any lender should be willing to have that conversation with you to say, like, how can we support you through a difficult period? So reaching out to the creditors themselves can definitely be helpful. But again, I think that puts more emphasis on the individual. And if somebody is struggling with mental health at that point, maybe having an external source of support from an organisation like a StepChange or Citizens Advice might be the way to go for them. Okay, any other questions?
I've got one.
Okay.
So if someone was having lower payments on their loans for a period of time, do you think after that period of time with the smaller payments after that, do you think that could take a toll on someone's mental health when it goes back up, or do you think it would still ease their mental health having that reassurance?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, because I suppose it depends what's caused the short-term issue. So if it's something that is a temporary decrease in income, for example, if somebody might be off work, sick, for example, if they're going to be off for a couple of months, then a short-term solution is probably going to work for them. If it's something that reflects more of a permanent change in somebody's circumstances, and this can happen with, you know, things like interest rates going up and their mortgage payment spiking, obviously leaving less room for within their budget to make normal loan repayments. In that kind of situation, it's probably more about finding an appropriate long-term solution that reflects the fact that it's a permanent change in somebody's circumstances. So again, it's a little bit of the individual just thinking, what do I feel sort of capable of? What's actually going to be best short-term, long-term? There's no, again, one-size-fits-all answer to that. But my instinct would be it's probably to do with whether it's a short-term situation that you can get over or something for the longer term. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So thank you very much indeed for spending your time with us today. For those people watching at home, if anything we've covered today has resonated with you, please know that support is available. Reaching out early can make a huge difference, whether that's speaking to somebody you trust or contacting one of the organisations that we mentioned and put on the screen earlier on. Thank you for joining us. As always, please do leave a comment below if you've got any questions, anything you'd like us to cover. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified about future videos, and we'll look forward to welcoming you for the next recording.